Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Learning from Leaders webinar hosted by the Yale Center for Customer Insights. Our speaker today will be Hubert Joly, former chairman and chief executive officer of Best Buy and now a senior lecturer at Harvard Business School. Hubert will be joined by YCCI Ogilvy Fellow and former chief brand officer at IBM, Jon Iwata, to discuss his new book, The Heart of Business. I will pop into the chat the sign up for the YCCI newsletter so you can stay on top of our next sessions and everything exciting that we have going on. We'll also be using the Q&A function, so please add any questions that you may have throughout the discussion there. Okay, Jon, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Emily, and good morning, good day to everybody. Thank you for joining. And we're really privileged here to have with us Hubert Joly, as Emily mentioned, the former CEO of Best Buy. He ran the company from 2012 to 2019, became executive chairman. And before that, he was the CEO of Carlson. He was an executive with Vivendi and EDS and a partner at McKinsey at the beginning of his career. I'm sure we'll talk about his journey. It's very much part of his book, which we're going to discuss. Today, as Emily mentioned, he's with Harvard Business School, another fine business school. And he's a member of the board of directors of Johnson & Johnson and Ralph Lauren, and he's also connected with HEC in Paris. It's a real privilege. Welcome, Hubert. Good morning.
Good morning, Jon. So looking forward to our conversation.
Well, I guess we have to start, if we could, with your arrival at Best Buy. And look, I don't remember exactly the state of Best Buy in 2012, but I could imagine that when you think about what was happening in the world of disruption and digital and online, who would want to become CEO of something like Best Buy, which, from my impression as a consumer, was on the endangered species list? What did it look like when you got there, and why in the world did you accept that role?
So, Jon, I do remember the state of Best Buy at the time in 2012. It's very clear. Everybody thought we were going to die. There was zero buy recommendations on the stock. And when I got the call from Jim Citrin at Spencer Stewart, who does a lot of the CEO searches in the US, he's a good friend of mine. I said, Jim, you're crazy, right? I know nothing about retail. And you're asking me to, this is a mess, right? And he said, no. First, they're not looking for a retailer, and two, you're a turnaround guy. You've done a number of these. They're looking for a fresh perspective. So at least take a look. And so he convinced me to at least study before saying no. And what I saw, Jon, was, and sometimes you have to go past, the rhetoric and what's in the media. What I saw was a situation where the world needed Best Buy. Customers, for a lot of our purchases, it's good to be able to touch, feel, and see the products and ask questions. And then the vendors needed Best Buy because they need a place where to showcase the fruit of their billions of dollars of R&D investment. So strategically, there was nothing wrong. The good news, Jon, was that all of the problems of the company were self-inflicted. It was not about blaming Amazon. It was about our prices being not competitive. The online shopping experience, which is so critical, was lousy. The speed of shipping was terrible. The store experience had become, mediocre, and the cost structure was bloated. And so that was good news, because if these are self-inflicted problems, you can correct them. And so I got convinced that there was enough assets, there was in the cards, enough assets to be able to effectuate a turnaround. And I thought that this would be fun. So that led me to tell the search committee of the board, I want the job. And that's how I would approach it.
Well, there are few successful turnarounds in business. I happen to be part of one under Lou Gerstner at IBM in the early 90s. I know from experience, and undoubtedly there were 10,000 things that had to be done. But if you were to share with this group, what do you think were the keys to the success of the turnaround?
And there's a great deal of similarity actually with the IBM turnaround in the 90s and the Best Buy turnaround, because remember when Lou Gerstner said is the last thing that IBM needs at this point is a vision. We need execution, as he was being asked about what's your long-term strategy for IBM. And based on what I've shared about Best Buy, the priority was fix what was broken. And so in the first phase, there was really two major phases. One was the turnaround proper, which we called Renew Blue, that I'm going to talk about. And then there was a second phase, building the new blue, which was much more about growth and building, kind of company that everybody would love. But in the turnaround, I can talk to you about the what we did, but then I'll spend time on the how, because I think the how is even more important. But first, it's in a sense what we didn't do. I was getting a lot of advice on cut, the rhetoric around turnarounds. You have to close stores, fire a lot of people. That's not what we did. The key things were, first decision was to decide to be price competitive, and we decided to match Amazon prices. So take price off the table. At the time, there was a lot of talk about showrooming, people coming to our stores, and then talking to our associates, and then buying online where presumably it was cheaper. So we took price off the table. We improved the online shopping experience, because irrespective of where you complete the transaction, in at least 90% of the cases, you actually start the shopping journey online. So you want the shopping experience online to be great. We increased speed of shipping. We're now shipping as fast as Amazon, same day, next day. So essentially, we neutralized Amazon. Same price, same great shopping experience, probably better actually, and same speed of shipping. In soccer terms, this is a draw, right? And then we emphasized our other assets, including our stores and so we invested in the store experience. The creative thing we did was the partnerships. We partnered with all of the world's foremost tech companies, starting with Samsung and Apple and Microsoft and Sony and even Amazon and Google and AT&T and Verizon, where we did stores within the stores, right? If you're Samsung at the time, you have a choice, right? You can either open your own stores, or you can do a deal with me where in a matter of months, you're going to have 1,000 stores within a store, great locations, great traffic area, good for the customer, they can compare, good for the vendor, and good for us because, of course, it was part of our other people money strategy. And then we took some cost out. So that's the what.
Can I ask you a question? Because you said neutralizing Amazon, match their prices, improve the online, match the delivery. But if I'm an investor and I hear that you are going to match Amazon, that requires, I can imagine there's going to be margin compression, and you have to make investments in things like IT and so forth. And you have all the overhead that they don't have. How did you deal with the expectations of your board and with investors when they said, you're going to do what?
Yeah, exactly. So when we announced the price matching, the investors said exactly that. You bet, that's nice, but you're still going to die because your cost structure is higher. So you're still going to die. That's where, so several things I would say. One is we actually have a better customer because it tends to be a higher end, early adopters. So that's where there's more margin. There's a better basket because of how we sell. We also took $2 billion of cost out, so as to fund a lot of the investments. But the key was the partnership with the vendors. Because a world without Best Buy, if you're Samsung or Sony, is really not a good world, right? Because how can you show, if let's take a TV. Picture quality is a key buying factor for a TV. The only place in the world where you can see picture quality is in a store. You cannot see it online or at Walmart. And so this idea of showcasing is really valuable. So Best Buy, in a sense, is a two-sided business. You have the customers and you have the vendors. And in travel distribution, where I had worked with Council Wagon Travel, you make all of the money from the vendors. So we got tons of money from the vendors in terms of the investment in the fixtures, the display inventory, the labor, the marketing, better margins. And so that gave us, they essentially subsidized our showroom in a way that was unique, because there's no other place for them to do this at scale, and it's vital. And the irony is that even Amazon is doing this in our stores. Walmart and Target would refuse to sell Amazon's products, Kindle, Echo, and so forth. No, we said, no, this is what our customers want. And now you have an Amazon table next to a Google table where they can showcase what Alexa can do. And we even did a deal with Jeff Bezos where he gave us the exclusive rights to the Fire TV platform to be embedded in smart TVs. And these TVs can only be sold by Best Buy, at Best Buy, or by Best Buy on Amazon. And so the leadership lesson for me, John, is that strategy is not about beating competition. It's about doing what's best from a customer standpoint, and it's about refusing zero-sum games. And today, increasingly, as we think about this multi-stakeholder world, right, we have to think about win-win relationships with all of the stakeholders. So that's how we overcame that challenge. From the how standpoint, because I think that has very broad application, it was a very human-centric approach to the turnaround. The opposite of the cut approach. Like cut means people are the problem. I believe that people are the solution. So I spent my first week on the job working in a store, listening to the frontliners. And they had so much to say about what was working, but also what was not working. And my job was easy: take notes and then do what they had to say about what we needed to do in terms of the price match, improving the shopping experience. And they gave me some very concrete examples of what to do. And of course, if you did what they said we needed to do, of course, that built trust and confidence with them. So it starts with people. It's also start with people at the top of the company, right? In a turnaround, the approach to change management entails changing management at the beginning. So we had to redo the team. So it starts with people. It's also end with people. So one of the things I learned when I was at McKinsey from a client said, Hubert, in a turnaround, priority number one is increase revenue. It's amazing what revenue growth can do. As you're going to go after costs, start with going after non-salary expenses, which is all of the costs that have nothing to do with people, that are typically at companies the bulk of the cost structure. And to give an example, at Best Buy, John, we sell, let's say, a lot of large appliances, which we deliver to customers. Well, we ding appliances as we deliver them because, sometimes the doorway is narrow, or, so if you can reduce the damages to the appliances as they're being delivered, the customers are going to be happy because nobody wants to get a dinged appliance. And of course, you're going to save as well. And there were many, many examples around that. And if revenue growth and non-salary expenses is not enough, then you go after headcount, but then you try to redeploy people within the organization, or if they have to leave, you treat them as well on the way out as on the way in. And the last piece about people is about energy. So we get trained in these great business schools, all about coming up with the right answer, the right strategy. No, it's about mobilizing the organization. And creating energy. In physics, we learned that energy is a finite quantity. In a human organization, it's not. You can create it by, co-creating the plan, getting going, celebrating early wins, being vulnerable and transparent about problems. Oh, this one didn't work out as we had hoped. Let's rework that together, and so forth. So really learned a lot about this human-centric approach to, improving operational performance there.
In your book, you talk about humanity, but you also talk a lot about purpose, both. Talk about purpose and also the linkage here with people, humanity.
Yeah, and it's important because today most companies are working on defining their purpose. It's become very fashionable, and it's an important thing. But of course, the challenge is if the purpose stays at a very high level of abstraction and nothing happens, then you've done nothing. For us, it was a game changer, in particular in the second phase of our journey, where as we were thinking about, so where do we take the company? A critical moment was to say, we're actually not a retailer. Defining your business based on the historical way you've done business is very limiting. And so we said, we're a company that's in the business of enriching lives through technology by addressing key human needs. It does two things. One, it's more inspiring than being a retailer, but also it vastly expands the addressable market. And so one of the things you need to do is make sure the purpose becomes the cornerstone of the strategy. And so, for example, that has led us to get into the healthcare space, helping aging seniors live in their home longer independently. So think about aging parents and whatnot, putting sensors under their bed, under their sofa, in the kitchen, the bathroom, fall detection. And with AI and remote monitoring in a care center, you can detect whether something wrong is happening and trigger an intervention. We would never have done this if we had defined our business as being a retailer. Similarly, our in-home advisor program, which I would encourage everyone listening to take advantage of, which is, if your need is too complex, maybe you're redoing your family room, it's hard to deal with that, online or even in a store. So we'll come to you as a designer would. We'll develop a proposal. You can always say no, and it will make it happen. And our aspiration is to become, a CIO or CTO for your home, which of course gives us the opportunity to expand our addressable market. So you have to take that purpose and translate it into strategy. But more importantly, and that's the connection between purpose and humanity, you have to help everyone at the company write themselves into the purpose of the company, connecting what drives them with their work and with the purpose of the company. So let's slow down here. Oftentimes, we think about these things as top down. So we've defined our purpose, John, let's roll it out. And let's imagine for a second that you and I walk into a Best Buy store and we share with the associates, we have some great news. We have a new purpose. It's to enrich lives through technology by addressing key human needs. And I see you smile, right? Because of course they're going to say, Hubert, you're saying what? You want us to do what at 10 a.m. when we take our shift? It's corporate speech. So you have, and I give these examples to make it really concrete, right? Every company has got to figure out their journey. We had a team work on that. How do we make it real, right? So we took 40 or 60 of our best middle managers, people with experience at the company, and they helped craft an approach to make it understandable that translated into one day, on a Saturday in June, I think of 2018, we closed all of the stores on a Saturday for a few hours, and we did a training. No PowerPoint, no video from the CEO, but in small groups we talked about two things. One is share with each other your life story. So I got paired with an associate, a young woman who had been in an abusive relationship with an ex-boyfriend. She had been homeless. For her, Best Buy was her home, really her family. So all of a sudden I see her as a human being, not just as an employee. And then second exercise, share with each other the story of somebody in your life who is an inspiring friend. So for me, it's my older brother, Philip. He's a cool guy. I just love it. Okay, so what we're going to try to do, which we already do when we are at our best, is we're going to try to be for each other and to treat each other and the customers as human beings. And we're going to try to treat each other and our customers as if we were an inspiring friend to them. So really make it, now everybody can relate to that, right? And then it's about creating an environment to make it stick, because you can go to, we've all gone to seminars and workshops, but if the environment doesn't change, so it's about creating, and I give a lot of details in the book, creating an environment where on a sustained basis and at scale, you can do something that I describe as unleashing human magic, where at scale, people working at the company can indeed connect what drives them with their work and be the best, biggest, most beautiful version of themselves, which may be the piece where I've learned the most and where I think has the greatest impact on the amazing growth that the company is now experiencing.
Hubert, for most people, the culture of a company is the person you work for. And in this period of time when you're now moving to build the new blue, and you're focusing on purpose and making it very personal at the store level, at the associate level, what did you have to do with what, I don't know what you call them, but the supervisor or the first line manager? So if you have a store, and I'm hearing this from Hubert, this sounds great, and I can do this for the customer, but if my manager says, don't wait, what are you doing that? You should be doing that, drive sales up, do this, do that. How did you deal with the manager layer?
Yeah, so that's all about this environment where you can create human magic. So there's 5 ingredients. So I'm going to touch them very quickly. And again, there's more detail in the book. The first one is about connecting dreams. And maybe one or two illustrations of that. There's a store GM in the Boston market. He would ask every one of the associates in his store, okay, what is your dream? At Best Buy or outside of Best Buy, right? Write it down in the break room. My job is now to help you achieve your dream. And so you create an expectation, a definition of leadership, which is not about being the smartest person in the room, which is not about managing by the numbers, but by having a focus on creating the right environment in your store and being very explicit around this. So this started, at a big leadership meeting we had. Every year we gather all of the store GMs just before holiday. And the emphasis was on a single question, which is what drives you as an individual? And we ask everyone in the field to answer that question. And it's amazing what you see. It's, it's helping my family. It's helping my community. It's never about power, fame, glory, or money. I mean, that's not. Now, if you have some of those, you say, well, it's okay. You can work somewhere else. We don't need you here. So it's this personal connection. The other illustration of this was, because you have to set the tone at the top. Every quarter, we would gather our executive team to work on our strategy, our plans, our progress. And at one of these events, I asked every one of the executives to come with a picture of themselves when they were little. Okay, and over dinner, we spend the entire evening sharing with each other our life story and what drives us in life. What kind of a leader we're interested in being, how we want to be remembered. And that was a game changer, because all of a sudden you realize that, your CFO, your CMO, or CHRO, they're actually human beings with all of their complexity. And we also realized that with maybe one or two exceptions, all of us were there driven by a common desire to do something good in the world, right? It's the golden rule. And so that gives us the courage and the desire and the energy to use Best Buy as our platform to be a force for good in the world. So there's a big leadership component there, because the biggest decision we make, I think, is around who do we put in positions of power and what do we expect of them. There's many other facets of doing this, but it's all about shaping that environment around this idea of connecting dreams, creating an environment where there can be genuine, authentic human connections. There can be autonomy. People have to be able to lead in the way that is the best version of themselves. To create another one was around mastery and individualized people development. So we had the supervisors. Their main role became coaching the associates, not screaming about the numbers, right? But about, okay, so this is where you are in your journey to become a great salesperson or a great Geek Squad agent. Let's work on, the next set of opportunities through weekly individualized coaching. So it's a very different approach from the traditional approach when we try to implement something, the top-down approach where you share the strategy and you expect people to comply. Motivation is intrinsic, so you have to be able to create an environment where you call on that intrinsic motivation.
I want to ask more about the criteria or attributes that you think leaders must possess to land those jobs, because you said that's an important role you have, but also the CEO, same thing with the CEO. Before I do that, here's a question from Sergio in Geneva. Where do you put the limit of your purpose so it expands the addressable market, yet not too far from the bread and butter core business so it remains credible?
Yeah, and as companies work on defining their purpose, that is a critical question. What's the approach, right? This is not a fluffy thing where you get the communications team together and try to come up with something that sounds good. That's not good enough. For me, that definition of purpose is at the intersection of four things. What are the unmet needs you're trying to address in the world? Two is, what are you uniquely good at? Three, I think passion is good. So what are you passionate about? And then four, how you can make money, right? So it's rigorous. It's not fluffy. An interesting development on these lines, by the way, in terms of what the world needs, the first criteria, is how increasingly we'll see companies not only look at the customer needs, but also the needs of their other stakeholders, their employees, the community, the planet. And I was just reading, I'm on the board of Ralph Lauren, and Ralph Lauren has just released, a new iteration of their Design the Change strategy, where in the design of their clothes, they take into account, diversity. They take into account also sustainability, with the circular economy. And so it's a much more integrated approach to defining what the world needs in some kind of declaration of interdependence. So that process is a rigorous process, because then, yes, it doesn't just stay on the website. It needs to become the core of the business. Now, there was an interesting challenge as we were doing this, because if the core of the strategy becomes, or the emphasis becomes, let's say, our health initiative that I described, then the rest of the business, people in the stores are saying, that's nice, but how does that relate to me? So the purpose has to penetrate all aspects of the business. It cannot be, at least in our case, it was not a new business versus old business. We transformed the entire business in pursuit of that purpose. And when you go to a store today, while it's still a retail experience, the associates have been trained and are inspired to really, treat you as a human being. So I remember a story of one day I was visiting the store in Mountain View, California, as I was also visiting Google. And I saw a woman walk into the store and talk to Anthony Vu, one of the associates in the store. And she was looking for headphones. And Anthony did not ask her, what brand are you interested in, or what features. He asked her, what are you going to use them for? Right? And she said, well, I'm going to use them at work. And so for me, I like to listen to music, but if John wants to talk to me, I want to be able to hear that John is talking to me. Because I'm at work, right? I'm not in my audio studio at home. And so Anthony said, okay, I got you, and didn't sell the most expensive, most profitable, headphone. Is sold her something relatively cheap, but that was a good fit with what this woman was looking for. So it's this idea of having everybody write themselves into that story.
Thank you. But just a comment to the audience here, as we just answered Sergio's question, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A feature and we'll get to those. So I want to come back to, look, we're connected to business schools and people who attend business schools, either as graduate students or as executives wanting a more skill enhancement. Of course, they want to think about what matters as you advance your career in any way you define that. You said earlier, if you're going to lead a company this way, it changes the role of the leader. And so talk to us about the how it changes the attributes and qualities that you look for, that let's call them the tiebreakers. If you're going to pick the head of sales, the head of marketing, your next CFO, the head of a region, what becomes really critical factors in your mind in this way of leading?
Yes, and let's step back, because I think what we're dealing with at this stage, John, to quote Louis XVI, right? Louis XVI in 1789 asked Monsieur de la Rochefoucauld when the revolution was starting, he said, is this a revolt? And Monsieur de la Rochefoucauld's response was, sire, no, this is a revolution. And I think in business, we've been so influenced in the last, pick a number, 40 or 50 years, by two main theories, right? Milton Friedman, shareholder primacy, and Bob McNamara, top-down scientific management. And when I look at the state of the world today, I think that these two theories are largely responsible, but both of these guys are on my FBI most wanted list, right? They got us into the ditch here. And so the philosophy that I talk about in the book is very different. It's the idea that at the heart of business is the idea that business is about pursuing a noble purpose, putting people at the center, creating the environment where you can unleash that human magic, embrace all stakeholders in a declaration of interdependence, and treat profit as an outcome. That's a very different approach than what we've seen in the last 40 or 50 years. Fortunately, most people, now believe it's the right direction, but it requires rethinking, why we work. What is a company? For me, a company is it's not a money printing machine. It's a human organization made of individuals working together in pursuit of a goal, and that goal has to be to contribute to the common good, treating profit as an outcome. It leads us to rethink how we mobilize people. The whole idea, I sit on boards and on a couple of comm committees. We spend all of our time designing comm systems with the old idea that incentives are going to drive behaviors. We could ask people to think for a second, listening, our financial incentives would drive your behavior. This morning when you woke up and you designed what you were going to do today, to what extent was it driven by what's going to optimize your bonus at the end of the year? You can write in chat, if you believe you're purely driven by incentives, tell us in chat whether that's the case. I think I can guess the answer, but I'm still looking forward to the comments. And so the implications on leadership are massive. The model, the old model of leadership, the leader as the superhero who knows everything, he's got all the answers, is there to save the day, is driven by oftentimes power, fame, glory, and money. We know a few of these, right, Jon? And it doesn't work. Nobody wants to follow these leaders. So I think we need to therefore rethink who we recruit, which was your question. Apologies for taking time to get to your question. The context is important. I used to place a lot of emphasis on expertise and experience. I wanted the best e-commerce person, the best supply chain person, the best marketing person, you name it. Increasingly, I've evolved and spent time understanding who is this person? What kind of a leader is this person? What drives this person? How will this person want to be remembered? I remember when I was interviewed to become the CEO of Kelson Companies by Marilyn Kelson Nelson, the daughter of the founder, to become the CEO of the company. One of the questions she asked me, Jon, was, Hubert, tell me about your soul. Who asked this question, right? And yet it's such a profound question, because I think one of the things we've learned during this COVID crisis, or rediscovered, is the importance to lead with all of our body parts, not just the brain, but also the heart, the soul, the guts, the ears, the eyes. And so I think that is the question of who is this person, and are they a good fit for a leadership model that's about purpose, that's about humanity, that's about serving, creating the right environment, and about authenticity, empathy, and vulnerability. I think that's going to make a big difference. And to talk about business schools, at business schools and business education, we've placed a lot of emphasis historically on the know and on the do. And I think increasingly we need to spend more time on the be.
We got a lot of questions now coming in here. So I'm going to go to Katie's because it relates to just what you said. I love what you're saying, but it is hard not to be cynical about the idea of leading with heart. As someone who's been consulting with many companies for the past 25 years, it seems to be the antithesis of how so many businesses are run. So is it a case of a company is lucky if they get an Hubert because of just who you are and how you were raised and your journey? Or how do you respond to Katie's question?
I think, so thank you, Katie. We love, putting it out there. I think we're seeing a massive evolution. The CEOs I know today, the companies I know, in general, they're moving in that direction. And so it's not a question of convincing them that this is the right direction, but this is so much a rewiring for all of us, self-included, of how we've been told, what to do, or what we've been told, and how we've been raised to lead. That I think there's a large group of leaders who are eager to move in that direction, but find that it's hard. They don't know how. And part of the reason why I wrote this book is because I wanted to share everything I've learned, and because of the credibility of the share price going from 11 to 110, I thought that my voice would have some weight. And the book is full of details on how. The reason why I'm teaching at Harvard, the reason why I'm coaching and mentoring CEOs is to do whatever I can to help leaders move in that direction. So I see a situation where the majority of leaders are keen to move in that direction, are on a journey to become more purposeful, more vulnerable leaders, and all of us need help. And on the way, I got a ton of help, John. I give a lot of credit to my coach, Marshall Goldsmith, and my second coach, Eric Pliner, who've helped me become a more empathetic and caring leader, and put more emphasis on this. So I think to Katie, I think we're at the beginning of a journey. And all of us have the opportunity, if you're a consultant, people need help. People need your help. And if you find that, this leader or that leader is not quite ready, there's many who are going to need your help. And I think what makes me optimistic is that, as a generation, we have the opportunity to create a future that's better than what we have today, and that is more sustainable. It doesn't exist yet, that future. But I think as leaders, we have the opportunity and the imperative, right? Because frankly, we have a few ticking time bombs on our hands to create that future. So much to be done, much to be learned, because I think we're just at the beginning of that journey. There's so many questions. How do you really fully embrace all stakeholders in an era that's just not just going to be about shareholder activism, but stakeholder activism? How do you embrace that? How do you deal with that? Lots of questions, but much to be done.
I'm going to put together Sergio's question with Sagdeep's here, because they're about getting behavior right. Okay, so Sergio asked, so what are the right incentives for the behaviors you're describing? I mean, what do you do to try to get people to behave in the way you prescribe here? And also, Sagdeep talks about delegation. So if you decentralize and empower as you push down, how does this work? So now I've got the right incentives and I'm delegating or empowering to do the right thing based on our value system, but it could result in, as he says, inertia and chaos, incentives and delegation and empowerment.
So we've been trained to believe that incentives were a critical driver of behaviors. There's actually interesting research by MIT that shows that if anything, financial incentives tend to deteriorate performance. So it's very counterintuitive to what we've been trained. There's actually a lot of spiritual reflection on this. If you're too focused if you focus people too much on the goal, it narrows the mind, and it makes us less loose and less creative in terms of how to get to the goal. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have rewards. I'm a big believer that wealth should be distributed. I do believe that incentives can be used to communicate what's important. So it's a communication moment. So at Best Buy, we talked about even in the beginning of the turnaround about growth and services and customer satisfaction and so forth. But the underlying truth or the secret is that the true motivation is intrinsic. So you have to find ways to call on what really drives people. And it's back to this idea of connecting dreams. And that's the biggest thing. To the question of decentralization or autonomy, which is one of the 5 ingredients to unleashing human magic. Yes, you cannot create chaos. And at first, when we were talking about this, I said, oh my God, what are people going to do, right? But here is a specific thing we did that was so helpful. In the turnaround phase, a lot of decisions were quite centralized because frankly, when the ship is sinking, you need to be decisive, right? So the decision to match Amazon prices, I personally made that decision. The decision to partner with Samsung and a number of the other vendors, I was very involved in these decisions. But when we moved from Renew Blue to building the new Blue, we wanted to accelerate our growth and become a more agile company. If we were limited to the decisions I was going to make, we would be too slow. So there was a moment where I actually shared with the executive team, let's be clear, there's only 4 or 5 decisions I'm really responsible for. It's the overall strategy, it's who's on the team, it's the culture and values of the company, big investment decisions, that's it. For the rest, let's see how far down we can push these decisions. And let's be clear about how the decision is going to be made. Because one of the things that was slowing us down was if an executive, didn't agree with something that somebody said, right? They would raise their eyebrows and say, oh, I'm not sure. No, I don't think I would do it this way. And then people would freak out and say, Jack is saying he's not on board. So we said, no, it's not how we're going to work. If Jason is in charge of this particular aspect of the strategy, let's see who Jason should consult to make the decision. And then your role, if you're going to be consulted, is not to raise your eyebrows. We have no patience for eyebrows, right? But you need to do your best job. You need to do your best to provide the best input you can. And then you need to support what Jason is going to decide. That was a game changer. And then further down, so if you think about an individual blue shirt, or then I'll talk to some of our digital teams. For the blue shirts, we said, look, this is the intent, right? The intent is to be human and treat our customers as human beings and as an inspiring friend. So we'll give you tools on, says and do's and so forth, but you don't have to use them. Be driven by what is the purpose here and what's the idea. That was a game changer. Mm-hmm. The other one was around agile. Many companies are moving in that direction. We finally got there, and it allowed us to accelerate. It had an imperative, which is for middle management to understand that their job was changing, right? Because if you empower a team to develop a new feature or new business, in leadership, you need to either lead, follow, or get out of the way. So why don't you practice a little bit, get out of the way, and then empower these teams. So all of this needs to be orchestrated. And the big leadership lesson is that it's not a role as leaders, as senior leaders, it's less about coming up with the right answer from a strategic standpoint, but more to engineer the environment so that all of this can be done at scale. So, of course, in a few minutes, we are not doing justice to the topic, but that's the general idea.
That environment, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Hubert, but it's in your book, just for the audience. That environment is, it does include looking at redesigning, if necessary, processes, performance management, hiring criteria, incentives. Yep. So all of that's in part of that environment.
Yeah, and one of the key things that we changed was how we do performance evaluation. Mm. So, and we can ask everybody to think about, I know in my life, situation where your boss would tell you, these are 3 things that you're doing well, and these are 3 things you need to get better at because 6 months ago, that didn't go so well. How draining is this, right? Back to another point, right? Write in chat if you like to be told what to do. Nobody likes to be told what to do. Towards the end of my tenure at Best Buy, all of my direct reports had a coach, and they would do annual 360s. And so when we would get together every 6 months to talk about their performance and their development, instead of me talking, it was them who would come prepared and say, these are the things I'm quite excited about. I think they're working well. I've grown. The business is performing. These are things where it's been harder. I don't think we did really as well as we could have or should have. And I have opportunities there. As a result, these are looking ahead over the next 6 months or 12 months. This is what I want to focus on, both from a business standpoint, but also from the standpoint of my own development. These are things I'm planning to do to help me grow in these areas. And my role in these discussions was 2 things, John. One, not so fast. I don't think you're spending enough time on the first thing, which is all of the things you are great at. I think there's many more. Let's spend more time bragging about how great you were. And then 2, on the last piece, which is what they're going to do, one question: how can it be helpful to your development? So it's a completely different mindset. Again, it's this idea of unleashing human magic, as opposed to I'm your boss, so therefore I have a God-given right to tell you what you're good at. It's crazy, right? So very different mindsets. So different, profound changes.
We're almost in the home. We are in the home stretch here, and there are 2 questions here. Then I've got another one. If we can do this in the remaining time here. Lori's been patient. This is about set our expectation about how long it takes to change a culture from what it was to what you're describing here. And by the way, she says, as a retired naval officer, your strategies truly work.
Yes, and the armed forces are such a wonderful, leadership development ground. And thank you for your service, of course, Laurie. So culture change takes time. It's really hard. And which, by the way, one of the key things we get to do as a leader is decide when to do what, right? Where somebody said we're the guardians of the clocks. And so in the initial stages, we didn't start with culture. One of the things I remember from McKinsey is the idea of 3 different types of levers to affect change. One is the direct levers, so ensure price competitiveness, have better service, introduce new products. 2 is indirect levers. So it's more organization, incentives, things like that, if you believe in incentives. And 3 is contextual levers. So culture, values, leadership. The first one, direct levers, much faster to implement, but not necessarily lasting impact. Culture takes longer, but much more lasting impact. So in the initial stages, it was 80% on direct levers. But when we moved to building the new blue, it was much more about the contextual levers. Mm. The good news for me is that the DNA of Best Buy was actually very good. The history of the company around people and customers, was deep. The problem that Best Buy ran into is that for a few years, the culture got corrupted, frankly. But it was you could revive it. But still, it takes years because there's so many learned habits. Supervisors just managing by the numbers, right? And the leader as the superhero, learning to be vulnerable. There was a moment, and what's powerful is what it takes to change the culture. So one day, Cami Scarlett, head of HR at the company, and she was also head of stores at the time, shared with everybody at the company how for many years she had struggled with depression following the deaths of her 2 parents. Not too many C-suite executives at large companies talk about their mental health issues and personal struggles, right? That's not, we're supposed to be superheroes, right? Come on. The fact that Cami did this signaled that it was okay to be human. It was okay to be vulnerable. It was okay, and it's a big leadership lesson, right? To say, I am Hubert, my name is Hubert, and I need help. And I'm struggling with this, right? There's an entire chapter in the book around, the dangers of perfection. And so, it's about human change. It took me, you could say 30 years, right, to make my own evolution as a leader. And so it takes time. Now, the changes, you can begin to see changes very quickly because, to the question of how do we change behaviors, the way you change behaviors is by changing behavior. John, I used to be paid a lot to say these things, right? Not so much anymore. What do I mean by this? When at the beginning we said, we're going to put a lot of emphasis on customers and we're going to be obsessed by this. And we're going to be obsessed by helping the frontliners. Well, my spending a full week working in a store sent a strong signal, or the fact that, we studied all of our, monthly business performance reviews by people, then customers, then financial results. That sends a signal. The fact that when we look at the business, we always studied with e-commerce, even though it was just 5% of the business. So you can change behaviors by changing behavior, but still it's a journey. And I think it continues to this day. And I'm so proud, by the way, of my wonderful successor, Corey. Amazing leader. She's doing a terrific job leading the company today.
We'll consider this the last question, and because I love this as well. So one of Claire's favorite stories is about the toy dinosaur, and I'll just say this as you relate it. It's a great story, but it's also emblematic of what can happen when you build this kind of company. Would you like to share that?
Yeah, Claire, thank you for reading the book and loving that story. It's also, for me, it helps understand what human magic is. So, back in 2012, quality of service in the stores had gone down, had become mediocre. But if you fast forward to 2018, one day, there's a young mother with her child, a 3 or 4 year old boy, come to one of our stores. The boy had received a dinosaur toy for holiday as a gift, but the dinosaur was really sick. The way the dinosaur was sick is the head had been dismantled from the rest of the body. So that's not good. And the child wanted the dinosaur to be cured. So they go back to the store. And at most stores, you would have been sent to the toy aisle. And with some luck, you would have been able to buy a new dinosaur. But a new dinosaur is not a cured dinosaur. And so on that day in that store, that's not what happened. There's 2 blue shirt associates who saw and understood what was happening. And so they took the sick dinosaur. They went behind a counter and started performing a surgical procedure on the dinosaur. And if you're watching The Good Doctor on Amazon, they walk the child through the steps in the procedure. And of course, substituted a new dinosaur, but gave back to the child a cured dinosaur. Now, the question, John and Claire and everyone, is do you think there was at the time a standard operating procedure at Best Buy on how to deal with sick dinosaurs, or maybe even better, a memo from me, the very smart CEO, on how to deal with these situations? No, is these 2 associates, found it in their heart to create that moment of happiness for the child and the mother, and they felt they had the autonomy to do that. And when you can create this at scale, which is all about creating the right environment, you get irrationally good performance. And at the time, our comps, that's what we call the growth of the revenue in retail, were really accelerating. And when I heard about that story, I said, oh my God, this explains the acceleration. You're getting magic at scale at the company. And I concluded at the time, John, that I had lost control of the operation, because it was beautiful. And I was not, dictating anything. It was just happening. So beautiful, and such a great illustration, Claire, of what human magic is about and what it can do.
I'm so happy we are concluding on that story, because it does two things. It tells us what is possible when you do what you described, which is to create that environment starting with a noble purpose, and you truly unleash human potential and their magic. And it also reminds us that we should get your book. It is more than a memoir, which you could have easily written. We learn a lot about you. Thank you for sharing your personal journey in the book, but it is a playbook. It is a recommendation. It is a prescription of how to build a truly great company for a new era. Hubert, thank you so much. I wish
John, if you allow me, I've just put in the chat the URL where not only a place where you can get the book, but you can also take a test, which is the first ever business electrocardiogram, where it can help you assess the health of the heart of your business. It's 20 questions, and so you'll be able to see where you feel you have some strengths and where you have some opportunities. So how cool is that? So,
I love
because
that.
then you get the prescription, right? The book,
Love it.
prescription is the book, but you first need the diagnosis, right?
We're going to start
Here you
calling
have
you.
it.
We're going to start calling you Dr. Joly.
Okay.
Well, Hubert, thank you. And if we were in a room together at Yale, we'd be hearing thunderous applause. But please join me in thanking Hubert for being with us today. And thank you, Hubert.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.